In this video, we're diving deep into Nietzsche's powerful technique to crush the ego instantly. Have you ever felt trapped by your own pride or fear, held back by the image you've built of yourself? What if true freedom lies in breaking that illusion right now? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover isn't easy. It's a bold call to confront yourself honestly and rise stronger than ever before. The ego is a fortress built of fragile bricks: pride, fear, habit, and illusion. It is the part of us that clings desperately to identity, to comfort, to the approval of others. Yet Nietzsche shows us that this fortress, no matter how imposing it seems, is destined to fall. The path to freedom, he teaches, is through self-overcoming, a brutal, relentless battle within where the ego is not gently coaxed to change but forcefully dismantled. To understand why self-overcoming is the battlefield where ego dies, we must first recognize the nature of the ego itself. The ego thrives on certainty. It loves labels, titles, and fixed roles because they give it a sense of permanence in an ever-changing world. The ego says, "I am this successful, good, worthy," and it fights fiercely to protect that image. But Nietzsche warns us that this static self is a lie. Life is not still water. It is a rushing river, wild and unpredictable. To cling to a fixed identity is to try to stop the river with your hands. The process of self-overcoming requires us to stare into that river and admit that who we are today is not who we must be tomorrow. It demands that we become restless, that we refuse comfort, and that we welcome the pain of change. The ego rebels against this. It screams that change means loss, that abandoning familiar identities is death. But Nietzsche teaches that this death is necessary, a death not of the body, but of the false self, the ego that limits us. In this battle, the ego disguises itself as many things: moral superiority, victimhood, stubbornness, or even false humility. It will use any mask to avoid the chaos of self-reflection. But Nietzsche urges us to be ruthless in our honesty. To crush the ego, you must be willing to see yourself without flinching, to acknowledge the parts you have inherited without question, the fears you've accepted as truth, and the comforts you cling to for safety. Self-overcoming is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real. It means acknowledging your flaws, your contradictions, and your limitations, not to condemn them, but to understand them so deeply that they no longer control you. The ego wants to hide these parts away, but true growth demands they be brought into the light. Only then can you decide which parts are truly yours, and which belong to the expectations and judgments of others. This is why solitude is essential in the process. Nietzsche did not see solitude as loneliness but as a sacred space where the ego loses its audience. Without applause, without distraction, the ego's false narratives begin to unravel. In this quiet space, the higher self speaks, not with words, but with a force that cannot be denied. It is here that the ego starves, and the true self begins to awaken. But the battle is not won once and for all. Nietzsche insists that self-overcoming is a lifelong task. The ego will always seek to rebuild itself, often in more subtle forms. The temptation to return to comfort is constant. The pull of societal approval is strong, but the higher self, the one forged through this internal wall, knows that each surrender to ego is a betrayal of potential. The will to power is the fire that fuels self-overcoming. This is not power over others, but power over oneself. The creative force that demands growth, transformation, and the courage to face uncertainty. The ego is static and fearful. The will to power is dynamic and bold. To crush the ego instantly, you must ignite this will within you. You must become the sculptor of your own spirit, willing to chip away at every false layer until only your authentic self remains. It is a terrifying path because it means giving up the safety of the known and stepping into the unknown. Yet it is the only path to true freedom. Nietzsche understood that most people choose the comfort of illusion over the risk of truth. But for those who dare to fight, who embrace the struggle of self-overcoming, the ego's death is not an end, it is a rebirth. This rebirth is not peaceful or gentle, it is fiery, wild, and alive. It shakes the foundations of who you thought you were and opens a horizon of endless possibility. The ego dies so that the self may truly live, not as a fixed image, but as a constant becoming, ever evolving and expanding. In practical terms, self-overcoming requires you to question everything you believe about yourself. What parts of your identity are inherited, unexamined, or imposed? What fears do you cling to because they feel safe? What desires are truly yours, and which are echoes of society's demands? This process is not a comfortable exercise but a brutal excavation. Yet it is necessary because the ego's hold is strongest in what we refuse to see. Nietzsche's teaching invites us to become warriors of the spirit, to fight the internal battle that few dare to face. To crush the ego instantly means to refuse all compromise with falsehood, to embrace solitude and struggle, and to ignite the will to power that leads to authentic self-creation. The ego may howl and resist, but in the silence of honest reflection and fierce will, it withers and falls. Only by standing in the fire of self-overcoming can you break the chains of ego and step into the fullness of your being. This is the highest challenge Nietzsche offers, and the greatest gift he promises, the transformation from false self to true life. The ego clings to its identity like a drowning man to a lifeboat, desperate for permanence in a sea that is restless and ever-changing. It seeks to define itself by labels, roles, and achievements, as though these were anchors that could hold it steady against the storms of life. Nietzsche challenges this illusion with the concept of the will to power, not power over others, but the power to break free from the chains of false identity and become the author of one's own existence. This will to power is the weapon by which the ego, with all its rigidity and false certainty, is crushed. To understand why the will to power is so essential, we must first see that the ego's greatest fear is change. It wants to be fixed, known, and safe. It wants a story to tell, a role to play, and a place in the world that never shifts. But Nietzsche points out that life itself is a force of becoming, not being. To exist is to flow, to transform, to embrace the chaos within and around us. The ego resists this because it equates identity with survival. To lose identity is to die, or so it believes. But Nietzsche teaches that to truly live, one must embrace becoming over being. The will to power is the creative force that pushes us beyond the static self and into an ever-evolving process of self-transcendence. It is the inner fire that drives us to break old patterns, shatter limiting beliefs, and refuse the safety of the familiar. The ego is brittle, the will to power is fluid and fierce. Where the ego seeks to preserve, the will to power seeks to create. This creative force is not about domination in the common sense of power. It is not about controlling others or imposing one's will externally. Rather, it is about mastering oneself, the only power Nietzsche ultimately values. To crush the ego instantly, one must ignite this inner will to power and use it to dismantle the false self. The false self is the ego's mask, fashioned from external expectations, cultural norms, and unexamined fears. It is not the soul but a shadow cast by the fear of the unknown. Nietzsche's insight is that the will to power demands responsibility. It demands that you no longer be a passive recipient of inherited values or a prisoner of societal roles. Instead, you must become an active creator, carving out your own path and crafting your own values. This act of creation is violent in the sense that it destroys old identities and replaces them with something new and authentic. It is a process of death and rebirth, an ego death that is not annihilation, but transformation. The ego resists this process because it cannot thrive in uncertainty. It wants to cling to what is comfortable and familiar. But the will to power embraces uncertainty, chaos, and risk. It says yes to life in all its complexity, refusing to be shackled by fear or pride. Nietzsche saw this as the essence of human greatness, the ability to dance on the edge of chaos and create order from it, not as a static law but as a living, breathing work of art. To ignite the will to power is to begin seeing yourself not as a fixed entity, but as a project, a work in progress that demands constant attention and courage. The ego wants to be declared finished, complete, perfect. The will to power knows that perfection is a horizon, always ahead, never reached, but always driving the journey forward. It is this relentless pursuit of self-overcoming that crushes the ego's grip on identity. Practical examples abound in Nietzsche's philosophy. The higher man is not the one who clings to inherited morals or the comfort of consensus. He is the one who breaks free from the herd, who rejects the easy narratives, and who accepts the burden of creating his own meaning. This requires looking honestly at the parts of yourself that are comfortable lies, those beliefs and desires implanted by others, and having the courage to destroy them, piece by piece. The will to power is also deeply creative. It does not merely negate, it builds. It allows you to fashion a self that is uniquely yours, not a shadow cast by society or the ego's own fears. This creation is an act of rebellion against the false identity and a declaration of freedom. But freedom is not granted lightly. It requires sacrifice, discipline, and an embrace of solitude. The ego fears solitude because it removes the mirrors of others' approval. But the will to power thrives there, where you confront yourself without pretense. Nietzsche's technique to crush the ego instantly is not a simple formula, but a call to awaken this creative will. When you activate it, the ego's fragile structures begin to crumble. You stop needing to be right or important in the eyes of others. You stop chasing superficial validation. Instead, you become the sculptor of your own soul, endlessly shaping and reshaping, fearless in the face of change. This process is not easy or comfortable. The ego will fight tooth and nail to survive. It will conjure doubts, distractions, and fears to pull you back into its prison. But the will to power is stronger when it is recognized and nurtured. It demands courage, the courage to face your own shadows, to question everything you have been taught, and to step into the unknown with faith in your own creative capacity. In the end, the will to power, as Nietzsche teaches, is the ultimate weapon against false identity. It cuts through the illusions that the ego clings to and opens the way for genuine self-realization. It is not about erasing the self, but about forging a new self, forged in the fire of challenge, struggle, and creation. To crush the ego instantly is to awaken this inner force and let it guide you beyond the limitations of the past toward a life of bold, authentic becoming. The ego clings fiercely to the approval of the many, for it thrives on belonging, acceptance, and validation. But Nietzsche unveils a deeper truth, that much of what we call morality is not an expression of individual truth, but the voice of the herd, a collective system designed to suppress and control the individual spirit. To crush the ego instantly, one must first understand that the ego's strength lies in its entanglement with this herd morality, a system that demands conformity and punishes deviation. Herd morality is the great enemy of self-overcoming. It disguises itself as universal good, but is in fact a mechanism to maintain sameness and mediocrity. The ego, fearing isolation and rejection, hides behind these imposed values to shield itself from the terror of difference. It tells us what to think, what to feel, what to desire, converting the rich landscape of individual possibility into a flat plane of uniformity. Nietzsche calls this slave morality, a morality born of weakness, fear, and resentment, designed to make the strong small and the meek appear virtuous. For the ego, herd morality is a comfortable prison. It says, "Be like everyone else, and you will be safe." But safety is the enemy of greatness. The ego's desire for safety breeds a cowardice that masquerades as humility, a quiet desperation disguised as contentment. Nietzsche challenges us to reject this false humility, to reject the comfort of blending in with the masses, and to embrace instead the terrifying freedom of being truly oneself. This rejection is not merely intellectual, but existential. To destroy the ego's foundation, one must confront the deep fear of standing alone. The ego does not simply fear external punishment, it fears the internal void that comes with isolation and radical authenticity. Yet Nietzsche shows that only by stepping outside the herd can one begin to hear the true voice of the self. The herd's noise, its expectations, judgments, and condemnations, must be silenced, and silence, though daunting, is the birthplace of freedom. In rejecting herd morality, the ego experiences a kind of death, a death that is necessary for rebirth. The ego built on external validation collapses, and with it, the illusions of safety and certainty. This collapse is not painless. It is a confrontation with loneliness, with uncertainty, and with the raw vulnerability of existence. But it is also the moment when the individual becomes capable of creating their own values, their own meaning, and their own life path. Nietzsche's call to reject herd morality is a call to become the Übermensch, the overman, who lives beyond good and evil as defined by the masses. This is a being who refuses to let the ego be shaped by the shallow judgments of others, and instead embraces the full responsibility of self-creation. To live beyond the herd is to live with courage and creativity, to say yes to life on one's own terms, even when those terms bring conflict, misunderstanding, and solitude. The ego will resist this transformation, often with great force. It will try to pull you back into the safety of consensus, using guilt, shame, or the promise of belonging. But Nietzsche reminds us that such belonging is a trap, a slow death of the spirit. True life requires a break from the herd, a bold leap into the unknown where the self is forged anew. This break is the instant crush of the ego's false foundation, because once you see the herd for what it is, the ego can no longer rely on it for identity or protection. To live in rejection of herd morality is to live dangerously, but it is also to live richly. It is to engage with the world as a creator, not a consumer, as a sculptor, not clay. The ego shrinks in this space because it loses its crutches. No longer bolstered by external approval, it must find strength within. And that strength comes from an honest confrontation with the self, a radical acceptance of one's unique path, and the fierce joy of independence. Nietzsche's philosophy is a call to awaken from the comfortable trance of herd life. It asks us to look at the ego and see that its identity is often borrowed, its values inherited, and its desires shaped by others. To crush the ego instantly, then, is to reclaim one's autonomy from this collective influence, and to assert one's own existence in defiance of the crowd. This defiance is not rebellion for its own sake. It is a profound affirmation of life and individuality. It is the act of saying, I will no longer live by your rules, your fears, or your lies. I will create my own meaning. This act dissolves the ego built on conformity and brings forth a self that is vibrant, dynamic, and free. In embracing this truth, the ego's death is not loss but liberation. The false self that depended on herd approval fades away, and a new self, strong, authentic, and self-directed, takes its place. This transformation is the heart of Nietzsche's technique, to crush the ego instantly, and the foundation for a life lived boldly and without apology. The ego is a relentless resistor. It pushes back against what it cannot control: pain, loss, failure, and the unpredictability of life. It clings desperately to the illusion that it can command the world, that it can shape existence to its liking. Nietzsche exposes this as a fundamental delusion. The ego's desire for control is the root of its suffering. To crush the ego instantly, Nietzsche offers a radical alternative: amor fati, the love of fate. This is not passive acceptance or resignation. It is a profound, active embrace of life exactly as it is, without denial, without complaint, without resistance. To truly grasp amor fati is to confront the deepest impulses of the ego. The ego demands that life be smooth, predictable, and favorable. When life is harsh, when suffering visits, the ego cries out in protest, blaming fate, others, or itself. It seeks to shield itself from pain through denial, distraction, or avoidance. But Nietzsche challenges us to invert this response. Instead of resisting fate, we are called to love it, to say yes to every moment, every hardship, every joy, as though we had chosen it ourselves. This is no easy teaching. The ego recoils at the idea of embracing suffering and loss. It wants to fix the past, control the future, and shape every outcome to its liking. But amor fati demands a complete surrender to reality, a joyous acceptance of life's totality, not just its pleasures. This surrender is the final and most profound blow to egoic resistance. It dissolves the ego's stubborn illusions of control and invites us to dance with the chaos of existence. Nietzsche's vision of amor fati is both fierce and beautiful. It is the acceptance that life's struggles, failures, and tragedies are not obstacles to be avoided, but essential parts of the creative process of becoming. The ego sees these as threats to its identity. Amor fati sees them as the raw material for transformation. To love one's fate is to transform pain into power, to see each challenge as a step toward greater strength and authenticity. When we practice amor fati, the ego's need for safety and certainty begins to crumble. We learn to meet life on its own terms, not ours. We stop demanding that the world conform to our desires and start aligning ourselves with the flow of existence. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. It frees us from the ego's endless struggle for control and opens the door to a deeper freedom, the freedom to be fully alive in every moment, no matter how difficult. This freedom is not passive, it is an active engagement with life's fullness. Nietzsche invites us to say yes not only to the triumphs, but also to the defeats, to embrace the eternal recurrence of our lives with love and courage. This means accepting that if we had to live this life over and over again, with every joy and every sorrow, we would still choose it. Such a radical affirmation of existence shatters the ego's grip because it no longer sees suffering as a failure, but as an essential part of meaning. The ego fears this because it thrives on separation and judgment. It divides life into good and bad, success and failure, self and other. Amor fati dissolves these dualities. It invites us to see life as a unified whole, where every experience contributes to the unfolding of our unique path. This unity is the antidote to the ego's fragmentation, the source of resilience and peace. Nietzsche's teaching on amor fati is a call to transform how we relate to life itself. Instead of fighting against fate, resisting what is, or wishing for a different reality, we are invited to embrace the totality of existence with gratitude and love. This is the ultimate act of courage and the surest way to crush the ego's illusions of control. In practical terms, this means learning to respond to adversity with acceptance rather than denial, to see obstacles as opportunities for growth rather than threats, and to cultivate a deep trust in the unfolding of life. It means practicing presence and gratitude, even in the darkest moments, recognizing that the ego's resistance only prolongs suffering. Through amor fati, Nietzsche offers a way to live with the ego, not as its servant or victim, but as its master. The ego's death is not a destruction, but a transformation, a surrender to a deeper wisdom that accepts life's complexity without retreat or rebellion. This surrender is not defeat, but victory, the victory of a spirit that loves life fully, fiercely, and without condition. In this embrace, the ego's false sense of control dissolves, and a new self emerges, one that is resilient, creative, and free. This self no longer fears fate, but welcomes it as a teacher and ally. It moves through life with grace and power, no longer shackled by the ego's demands but alive to the eternal dance of becoming. To live amor fati is to live beyond ego, beyond fear, beyond resistance. It is the highest expression of Nietzsche's philosophy, the final blow that crushes the ego instantly and leaves in its place a soul awakened to the profound beauty of existence as it is. In the end, to crush the ego instantly is to embark on the most demanding and courageous journey, the journey inward, where all illusions are confronted and dismantled. Nietzsche shows us that the ego's fortress, built on false identity, herd approval, and the desperate craving for control, is meant to be broken down. Through relentless self-overcoming, the awakening of the will to power, the rejection of herd morality, and the radical embrace of amor fati, we strip away the masks that bind us. This process is no surrender to weakness, but the forging of strength through honest confrontation with our own shadows and limitations. The ego's death is not an end, but a powerful transformation, a liberation into becoming, an eternal dance of creation and destruction within the soul. It is here, beyond fear and falsehood, that we find true freedom, the freedom to live boldly, authentically, and without apology. Nietzsche's technique is not a mere concept, but a call to action, a call to those who dare to live beyond comfort, beyond convention, and beyond the confines of the self, as they have known it. To crush the ego instantly is to say yes to life in all its raw and magnificent complexity, and in doing so, to become the highest expression of one's own humanity.